welcome to the Hindu Daily. Okay, so let's dive directly into our source material today. We're starting with the editorial section, and the first piece is, frankly, a tough one. It cuts right to the heart of global trust, aviation safety.
Right. This is about the Air India Flight 171 crash. It happened on June 12, 2025 in Ahmedabad, and the numbers are just devastating. 242 passengers plus another 19 fatalities on the ground.
And, miraculously, one survivor. But this story, it's not just about the tragedy itself, it's about the fallout, specifically the investigation.
Exactly. This incident very quickly went from being a national tragedy to an international crisis. And it's because India is a signatory to the ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization.
Which means they have to comply with some very strict standards, right? Annex 13?
That's the one. It governs how accident probes are run. They have to be independent, thorough, and transparent. The entire system of global air travel is, built on this idea of shared learning.
There's that old quote from the ICAO chairman Assad Kotui back in 2006.
He said, "A weakness in one is a weakness in all." It's this idea that transparency is the thread that holds the whole global safety strategy together.
And according to our sources, that thread really started to unravel from day one here, leading to a huge crisis of credibility.
It did. The preliminary report, which came out a month later, was criticized for being vague, for being selective, but it did confirm two facts that are, just chillin'.
The first one is about the fuel control switches. For both engines on the B787, they moved to the cutoff position just 3 to 4 seconds after the plane lifted off.
And this is where the technical detail is so important. This moves the whole incident out of the realm of a, common mechanical failure.
Why is that?
Because these switches, they weren't governed by software or some flight display. They are robust, mechanical, spring-loaded devices. To move them from run to cutoff takes a deliberate physical action.
So it can't be just an electrical glitch.
No. And the fact that both were cut off at the same time, right after rotation, it just defies conventional failure logic.
And that technical puzzle is compounded by the second piece of evidence from the cockpit voice recorder, the CVR.
The dialogue.
Yeah. The recording captured one pilot asking the other, "Why did you do that?" And the response was, "I did not do that."
So you have a technical fact that requires a physical input. You have that dialogue. You're immediately facing a conclusion that is just deeply uncomfortable for any investigation.
And there's another layer here. India didn't have the expertise to fully decode the data from the CVR and the flight data recorder.
Right, the DFDR. So they had to bring in foreign help immediately, specifically the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, and the UK's AAIB.
And the crucial detail here is that the NTSB and the FAA, they had the raw data within a week of the crash.
A week. Which leads to this next part where the geopolitical friction just becomes explosive.
Our sources say there were severe disagreements between the U.S. and Indian authorities on how to handle the findings.
Former U.S. officials have apparently described it as the worst breakdown they had ever seen in an international probe.
And you can tell how serious it was, because the Indian government had to provide commando protection for the chief investigator from the AAIB while he was in the country.
Commando protection, that is an extraordinary step for what's supposed to be a technical inquiry. It suggests the findings were politically explosive, not just technically inconvenient.
And we also have to look at the failings on the ground
Yeah.
right after the crash.
No, absolutely. By all accounts, it was a disaster for the forensic evidence. The crash site wasn't sanitized. Media were trampling all over the debris.
Wiping out vital clues.
Exactly. And then, maybe most dangerously, the airport was reopened in just 3 hours.
3 hours. But critically, they did it without the rescue and firefighting services being fully functional. They knowingly put subsequent passengers and ground staff at risk.
And that decision, to prioritize getting operations back to normal over safety, it seems to fit a worrying pattern.
People have brought up similar accusations from the 2010 Mangalore crash and the delays after the 2020 Kozhikode crash. It suggests a tendency to sacrifice strict safety protocols for political or economic appearances.
And for you, the listener, the key signal here, especially if you follow aviation, is what the U.S. authorities did, or rather didn't do.
With the B787 Dreamliner itself.
Precisely. The FAA has not grounded the B787 fleet. And since we know the NTSB and FAA had that CVR data within the first week, their refusal to ground the plane is a definitive statement.
It's saying the crash wasn't caused by a system-wide failure in the aircraft.
It unequivocally signals that, and it completely counters all the social media speculation that was flying around about a malfunction. The real danger now is India isolating these foreign experts, because that ultimately damages the very credibility that its entire aviation sector is built on.
That's a powerful transition because we're moving now to another area of India-U.S. interaction that paradoxically seems almost immune to this kind of friction. Article 2, Steady Gears, the resilient India-U.S. strategic machinery.
Yeah, and the article calls this the dual-track dynamic.
Which is a great way to put it because the paradox is pretty stark. On one track, the high-level political one, the optics are not great. The Quad Summit was postponed. There are U.S. trade sanctions.
And you're seeing the U.S. warming up its engagement with Pakistan, which is strategically offering things like port access and critical minerals. Those are real headwinds for the India-U.S. relationship.
Let's zero in on the trade friction. The sources point to a sharp drop in India's exports to the U.S. in 2025. And this wasn't just a general slowdown, it was directly impacted by U.S. tariffs.
Specifically, tariffs on India's purchases of Russian crude oil. It shows how geopolitics translates directly into economic pain.
Meanwhile, the U.S. turning to Pakistan is just pure pragmatism, securing supply lines, securing influence.
But, and this is the whole point of the article, beneath all that surface noise, the institutional machinery, the actual cooperation is accelerating like never before.
Right. Defense and technology. That's the core. And it's a relationship that's been deepening ever since that big 2008 civil nuclear deal. This deeper institutional track is what shields the whole thing from short-term political drama.
And we should probably give some weight to what these agreements actually are. It's easy to just list off acronyms.
Good point. We're talking about foundational agreements. There's LMOA from 2016.
Which lets both militaries use each other's bases for fuel and logistics.
CASA from 2018, which is about secure communications equipment, basically linking their platforms together.
And BASIA from 2020, which allows for sharing crucial geospatial intelligence.
So those agreements lay the groundwork, the technical foundation. And on top of that, you have the 2023 INDI-USX initiative, pushing into emerging tech and defense innovation.
And the most recent big milestone is that new 10-year defense framework agreement signed in October 2025. This is critical because it moves the focus away from just buying and selling weapons and towards actual coordination and joint tech sharing for stability in the Indo-Pacific.
The cooperation is industrial, too. Hindustan Aeronautics Limited signed a $1 billion deal with General Electric in November for fighter jet engines.
Right, solidifying that long-term industrial link. And you see the same thing outside of defense. The NISAR satellite, launched in July 2025, that's NASA and ISRO working together. It's for disaster resilience and agriculture, a huge civilian partnership.
And there was the Quad Ports of the Future conference in November with 24 partners focused on building resilient ports. This isn't headline-grabbing diplomacy. It's the quiet, essential work of building shared infrastructure.
And that's the key insight for you, the listener. This continuity is what matters. The institutional depth defense, tech, civilian agreements, it creates a resilience so that short-term political friction, like sanctions or a diplomatic snub, can't actually derail the long-term strategic path of the alliance.
That focus on long-term stability is a really good bridge as we move into the opinion section. We're looking at a major domestic security trend first, the sunset of Maoism and the path to tribal recovery.
And the analysis here suggests a real turning of the tide in one of India's longest-running internal conflicts.
The evidence being mass surrenders, right? Since October 2025 in the Danakarnaya region, which has always been the heartland of the movement.
Exactly. This continuous wave of surrenders is seen as the signal that the movement is, and this is a quote, on its last legs. It's moving beyond just being contained to a full-on organizational collapse.
And we can see that collapse in their own decisions. Back in August 2024, the CPI Maoist Politburo was forced to tell its units to split into smaller defensive formations.
Which is a classic sign of weakness. You're trying to avoid being encircled. It's not an offensive move. And the leadership losses have just been crippling for them.
Their general secretary, Nambala Keshava Rao, was killed in May 2025.
And then you have a Politburo member, Venugopal, surrendering with 60 of his cadres after peace talks failed. The numbers are just significant. I mean, other reports mention a single event where one cadre surrendered with 210 Maoists.
All of this has led to a shrinking geographic footprint. As of October 2025, only 7 districts in the whole country are officially classified as left-wing extremism affected, and only 3 of those are most affected.
So the conflict isn't totally gone, but the movement has lost its momentum and its mass base. But this military success, it just brings the government face to face with the real long-term challenge.
Which is development, actually addressing the tribal rights issues that fueled the whole movement to begin with.
Right. Military dominance is one thing. Development is much harder.
The article points to an urgent public health crisis in these interior regions. Things like severe anemia, cerebral malaria, dysentery from a lack of safe water, even snake bites.
So extending robust year-round medical facilities is step one. It's paramount for building trust.
And then there's livelihood. The government needs to learn a lesson from the Maoists themselves here. The Maoists initially won over the tribal populations by doing proactive economic things, digging ponds, creating orchards, and crucially, forcing contractors to pay higher prices for forest produce, like tendu leaves.
So the government needs to replicate that, but at scale. Establishing processing units, ensuring good quality seeds, building irrigation. You have to address the economic exploitation that was the engine of the insurgency.
Which brings us to the surrender and rehabilitation policy in a really specific critical detail here. The sources reveal that many male cadres were forced to undergo vasectomy while they were active in the movement.
Wow, that fundamentally changes the scope of what rehabilitation means.
Absolutely. These men need free reverse vasectomy procedures. Their wives often need reproductive technology assistance. This goes way beyond just job training or financial aid. It's about healing trauma and rebuilding family life.
And there's a social dimension, too. The source highlights that a lot of women join the movement to escape forced marriages.
So the government has to work through community leaders, the village elders, or Sayan, to spread awareness and institutionalize respect for a girl's consent.
And finally, education. Many of the surrendering cadres are illiterate. They only got the political education from the Maoist schools.
The solution seems to be establishing more educational ashrams. This model has worked well in sparsely populated villages. It's a residential environment where they can get the literacy and vocational skills they need to build a life.
Okay, so moving from that internal focus, let's look at external economics. The next article is A Shift in India's Trade Gaze. It's analyzing data from the Ministry of Commerce and Industry.
And the headline figure seems to reinforce what we talked about earlier, a drop of 4.9% in overall exports to the U.S.
It does seem alarming, but, as always, the devil is in the details. And this data actually paints a picture of a really rapidly adapting Indian export base.
So underneath that strained overall picture with the U.S., there are some success stories.
Two enormous success stories, actually, both in high-tech manufacturing.
Okay, let's hear them.
Telecom instruments. Exports to the U.S. saw an astonishing increase of 236.9%.
Wow.
And that's not random. It's a direct result of the China Plus One strategy, with companies shifting manufacturing to India. And then electrical machinery and equipment exports to the U.S. also grew, up 15.1%.
So high tech is booming. Where's the pain being felt?
The pain is concentrated in traditional, high-value consumer goods. Things that are probably more sensitive to trade tensions and consumer demand in the U.S. Pearls and semi-precious stones, they dropped by almost 40%.
Okay.
Gold and precious metal jewelry fell by over 28%. So it confirms the trade disputes aren't hitting everything uniformly.
And if we look at the total global export trends, not just the U.S.,
we see some sectors really confirming their dominance. Marine products are leading the growth globally, up nearly 27%. Industrial machinery is up a solid 15%.
and marine products are a good example of this global diversification, right?
A perfect example. The U.S. is still the biggest market, and it grew. But China is close behind. The really insightful jump, though, came from Europe. Belgium showed a stunning 125% increase in demand.
So Indian exporters have successfully found new markets, new logistics hubs.
Exactly. So the takeaway here is you can't just look at the headline trade disputes. You have to dig into the data. High-tech sectors are booming, supply chains are diversifying, and new markets are opening up, even while traditional exports struggle with some partners.
A fascinating demonstration of data complexity versus headline simplicity. And from the complexities of global trade, we pivot now to the stunning simplicity of fundamental physics. We're in the science section, discussing the precision quantum spectroscopy of the hydrogen molecule.
And this really is the ultimate test of established physics.
Why hydrogen? H2. Why is that the test case?
Well, because it's the simplest neutral molecule you can have, just 2 protons and 2 electrons. It's simple enough that our theory should be able to predict its behavior perfectly from first principles.
But it's also complex enough to have the features you find in bigger molecules.
Exactly. And the experimental side has finally caught up to the theory. Modern spectroscopy can now measure the energy levels in H2 with an accuracy of about 1 part in 100 billion.
Which is an uncertainty of just 10 kilohertz. It's just
Mhm.
an almost unimaginable level of precision,
And at that tiny level, the measurements are sensitive to effects we used to ignore, like quantum electrodynamics or QED.
which is how charged particles, like protons and electrons, interact with the electromagnetic field.
Right. And to match that experimental precision, the theory has to overcome 4 huge challenges all at once. First, electron correlation, how the two electrons interact. Second, the motion of the nuclei. Third, relativistic effects. And fourth, the tiny QED effects themselves.
And the older theories, they were often off by several megahertz. Where was the failure point?
The major failure point was what are called recoil effects. Think of the nucleus as a heavy bowling ball and the electrons as tiny flies orbiting it. Even though the ball is heavy, when a fly changes direction, the ball has to wobble just a tiny bit in response.
That slight wobble is the recoil, and it matters at this new level of precision.
It matters a lot. And the breakthrough came from the Polish researchers who decided to discard a computational shortcut that has been central to physics for nearly 100 years.
The Born-Oppenheimer approximation.
That's the one. It basically assumes the nuclei are so heavy compared to the electrons that you can treat them as fixed points while you calculate what the electrons are doing. It simplifies the math a lot.
But it's not perfectly accurate?
Not at this level. So instead, they used a much more demanding method, the direct non-adiabatic approach. They treated all 4 particles, 2 electrons, 2 protons simultaneously, one giant calculation for the whole system at once.
And the outcome?
Genuinely monumental for physics. The new theoretical predictions agreed almost perfectly with 9 recent, independent, high-precision measurements.
So this agreement transforms the hydrogen molecule. It's no longer just a simple test case.
It becomes a certified, high-standard reference point. It is now truly the exam for physics to pass.
Meaning that if in the future we see a disagreement between theory and experiment, even a tiny one,
It wouldn't be seen as a flaw in our existing quantum theory. It would be seen as the first evidence of something new, an unknown force or entirely new physics. It establishes the perimeter of known physical law with just unprecedented clarity.
that's a powerful endorsement of transparency and precision in science, which provides a really compelling contrast as we move to our final section, text and context. We're looking at a move that is, well, decidedly less transparent, India's SHANTI bill and the future of nuclear privatization.
And this bill, the Sustainable Harnessing and Advancement of Nuclear Energy in India bill, is driven by a clear strategic need. India is heavily reliant on coal. Renewables are growing, but storage is still a huge, costly problem.
And nuclear provides that stable 247 baseload power. It's seen as essential for hitting energy security and net zero targets.
Exactly. So the Shanti Bill's main goal is to diversify the power mix by ending the state's monopoly on nuclear power, a monopoly that's been in place for nearly 70 years.
So what does the bill actually do?
Yeah.
It ends the monopoly of the NPCIL. It opens the door for private Indian companies and foreign ones to get licenses.
Right. They can build, own, and operate plants under a public-private partnership model. The structure is specific. Private participation is capped at 49%.
So the government keeps the controlling 51% stake.
It does. And it retains full, non-negotiable control over all the sensitive stuff. The fuel cycle, waste management, safety protocols, all of it. And the regulator, the AERB, gets statutory status, so it's answerable to Parliament, which should, in theory, enhance oversight.
But the real controversy here is about liability and accountability.
It is. The bill makes liability predictable for the operator, but it also does something huge. It removes supplier accountability completely.
So if an accident is caused by faulty equipment from a supplier, the plant operator can't seek recourse from them.
Correct. And the liability caps for the operator are fixed at figures that critics are calling nominal. For the biggest plants, the cap is 3,000 crore. For smaller modular reactors, it's just 100 crore.
The opposition's critique is that this completely undermines the polluter pays principle. They point to Fukushima, where the civil damages were estimated to be 700 times the highest cap in this bill.
The argument is that private firms bear almost no long-term financial risk, shifting the burden entirely onto the public. Critics see it as a vendor-driven policy.
And there are also major transparency issues baked into this. Section 39 of the bill seeks to override the Right to Information Act, the RTI.
which means crucial safety information, operational details, they can just be classified as restricted, getting public accountability in the highest risk energy sector there is.
And it also affects labor rights. Section 42 removes nuclear workers from the General National Safety Framework.
A move that triggered unified opposition from 10 central trade unions who called the bill draconian. They argue it ignores India's own potential, like its thorium reserves, to cater to private interests.
A really compelling debate between energy security and public accountability. For our final source, we shift focus to the sky, looking at how data and precision are used to map Earth's hidden resources in spectral signatures, mapping Earth's resources from space.
This is the science of remote sensing. It's essentially analyzing the planet without physically touching it. Satellites capture electromagnetic energy reflected from objects, and every material, a leaf, soil, a rock, has its own unique reflective pattern.
Its spectral signature.
It's electromagnetic fingerprint. Exactly.
Let's start with mapping life, like vegetation.
Okay, so healthy plants have a lot of chlorophyll. They absorb red light for photosynthesis, but they reflect near-infrared light to stay cool. We use that contrast. It's called the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index, or NDVI.
So comparing the red absorption to the near-infrared reflection gives you a health score for the plant.
You got it. And that data is incredibly practical. It lets scientists calculate forest biomass, basically weigh trees from space, which is crucial for monitoring carbon storage and climate change.
And what about mapping water?
Two main techniques. The first is optical indexing. Water absorbs near-infrared light. A modified version, the MNDWI, is even better in cities because it can tell the difference between water and the deep shadows cast by tall buildings.
And the second method?
Synthetic aperture radar, or SAR. This uses active radio waves, so it works through clouds, it works at night. Calm water acts like a mirror to radio waves, reflecting them away from the satellite. So in the final image, water appears pitch black. It's invaluable for mapping floods in real time.
And what about mapping what's underground? Oil, gas, minerals?
For that, you need hyperspectral sensors. They don't just see red, green, and blue. They split light into hundreds of narrow, specific colors.
Which lets them do what?
Identify trace minerals on the surface. A standard satellite might see a green forest. A hyperspectral one can tell you that a specific tree has a nitrogen deficiency and that the rock underneath it is limestone. For oil and gas, they look for microseepage tiny gas leaks that stress plants and change soil chemistry.
So if the oil isn't leaking, they look for the container, the geological trap.
Right. Satellites map exposed rock layers looking for dome shapes called anticlines. Over the ocean, they measure sea surface height. A large underwater structure, like a salt dome that traps oil, has enough gravity to create a tiny but measurable bump on the ocean's surface.
And they also map the Earth's magnetic field.
Because oil is usually found in non-magnetic sedimentary rock. So if the satellite maps show that the magnetic basement rock is very deep, it means there are thick layers of sedimentary rock on top, which increases the chance of finding oil.
And the ultimate use of this gravity mapping is for groundwater, the GRACE mission.
GRACE was just ingenious. It was two satellites flying one after the other. As they passed over a heavy mass on Earth, like a big underground aquifer, gravity would pull the first satellite a little bit faster, increasing the distance between them. By measuring that tiny change in distance, they could effectively weigh the water underground.
And that data showed the alarming groundwater depletion in North India.
It made abstract physics directly relevant to water policy and farming, a perfect example of the power of this technology.
So we saw the scientific community achieving extraordinary precision with the H2 molecule, reducing uncertainty to almost zero, turning it into an exam that fundamental physics has to pass. And this quest demanded absolute transparency and detail. But then we contrast that with the SHANTI bill, where critical data for public safety is being shielded from public view via Section 39's override of the RTI Act. Can a high-risk sector truly earn the long-term public trust and strategic relevance it needs without embracing that same level of granular, uncompromising transparency that science now demands? Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.